My name is Olivia Morgan, I'm 27 years old, and I never imagined I would have to fight my own family to protect my grandparents' legacy. The first thing I did after graduating from law school was transfer their $3 million estate into a trust. Last week, my parents and sister came in with knowing smiles. They said they had signed the papers transferring the house to my dad and asked me to move out by Friday. I just smiled and said, "Do you really think I'd let that happen?" Their reaction when they brought the movers back and found someone waiting on the porch is something I'll never forget. Before I continue this story, I would like to know where you are watching from in the comments section. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to follow my family's dramatic journey. To understand why I went to such extreme lengths to protect my grandparents' fortune, you need to know where the story begins. My grandparents, Harold and Martha Morgan, raised me from the age of 5. My parents, Richard and Elaine, largely abandoned me while pursuing careers in other states. In fact, they were just chasing a series of failed get-rich-quick schemes, living a life far removed from responsibility. The house I grew up in was a beautiful Victorian mansion in a historic neighborhood in Boston. It had been in my grandfather's family for 3 generations, along with many other valuable properties and investments, and was worth an estimated $3 million, no small sum, but for me, it was simply home, where I learned what family really was. Every morning, my grandmother Martha woke me up to the smell of hot muffins. "Wake up, my little lawyer." Before I even thought about studying law, my grandfather Harold taught me to fish in the small pond in the park. His patience was endless even when I kept getting tangled in my fishing line. In the evenings, we sat together in the library, each with our own book, occasionally reading out loud interesting passages. Those quiet moments were important to them. From my grandparents, I learned the values that made me who I am: honesty, hard work, and responsibility. My grandfather always said, "Your word is your commitment. If you break it, you lose something you can never buy back." My grandmother emphasized education and independence. A woman must know how to stand on her own 2 feet, especially when others try to tear her down. The relationship with Valerie's parents and younger sister was equally complicated. They came to visit only occasionally, usually at Christmas when they needed presents, or when they needed money. Each time they came back, the pattern was the same: overly affectionate and peppered with questions about their investments, ending with heartbreaking tales of unexpected expenses and loans that were never repaid. My father went bankrupt twice before I turned 10. My mother got involved in several questionable business ventures, from miracle diet pills to timeshares. They lived hand to mouth, always chasing the next get-rich-quick opportunity. Valerie, 7 years younger than me, grew up in that environment and learned the same manipulative and demanding ways. My sister should live with us, my grandmother had suggested after Valerie stole money from my piggy bank. But my parents had refused. Valerie was the only child they could manage, since she required little actual care. As my grandparents aged, their relationship became more strained. Dad called more, asking about her health, her will, who was managing her finances. Mom sent out letters recommending the nursing home, claiming the house was too big to manage. Each visit was tense, with hushed conversations that ended quickly when I walked into the room. Throughout my school years, I did well in school with constant encouragement from my grandparents. While many of my classmates were rewarded with new phones or trendy clothes, my grandparents invested in books, museum memberships, and study trips. At 16, I started working part-time at the library to help pay for expenses. They told me not to, but I saw that medical fees and property taxes were making them very tired. I decided to study law after an incident in my neighborhood in my senior year. An elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, were cheated by their son when they transferred their power of attorney and the son withdrew all their savings. I felt betrayed and helpless. I wanted to understand how to prevent injustices, especially against vulnerable seniors. University and then law school were very difficult because my grandparents' health began to decline. He had heart disease and had to undergo multiple surgeries. She had early-stage dementia. I chose a university close to home so that I could take care of her, refusing a scholarship to a school far away. In my final year of law school, I studied during the day, studied at night, and took care of hospital appointments and my grandparents. It was tiring in many ways, but they had sacrificed so much for me. That's what family members should do. Graduation day was a day of mixed emotions for me. Looking around the auditorium, I saw my grandfather in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank next to him, and my grandmother sitting next to him. Although she was sometimes confused, her smile was always bright when she looked at me. They were determined to attend despite their poor health. My parents and sister were absent, despite receiving invitations months in advance. Mom texted that morning to say she had car trouble. I had given up hope that they would be there for important moments, but their absence still hurt. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at his favorite Italian restaurant. He raised his glass to toast to the most wonderful granddaughter in Massachusetts. She agreed, complimenting me on my intelligence, like my grandfather. That pride made me both happy and determined to not let them down. During my final semester, I took an additional course in elder law and estate planning. It started out as a practical matter for my grandparents, but it soon became a passion. Professor Sarah Winters, a former elder abuse prosecutor, told the class, 70% of financial fraud against the elderly is committed by family members or caregivers. The betrayal is more painful than the loss of money. Her words resonated with me. I began researching protections, especially irrevocable trusts, which protect assets from greedy relatives while still giving the elderly control. The parallels between the cases I learned in class and my own family situation became more and more apparent. 2 weeks after graduation, I made a secret appointment with Nancy Hoffman, an elder law expert recommended by my professor. I brought along my grandparents' financial documents, which I had access to because I was helping manage the bills. Nancy examined them carefully, her face serious. "Your hunch is correct. Given the behavior you described and your dad's recent questions about real estate prices, there is something to be cautious about. An irrevocable trust would be a good asset protection, but your grandparents would have to agree to set it up." I didn't dare talk to them for fear that they would defend their son. That night, I tactfully mentioned it after dinner. He was very surprised. "Richard is so talkative, but he will never take our house. He is still my son." She was quietly worried, crumpling her wedding ring. Finally, she asked me why. I frankly shared what I had seen. The increased frequency of visits to check on their health, the investment questions, the suggestions for houses that were too big. Then I showed them Dad's email to a real estate agent asking for the selling price of a nearby house that I had come across while helping him with his computer. She burst into tears. 3 years ago, Dad had borrowed $50,000 from Dad for a business opportunity. Dad had promised to pay him back with interest, but when he asked about it at Christmas, Dad got angry. "We are rich enough not to remember that. You owe us for raising our daughter, not you." The old man's face turned pale. "Let me see the trust papers," he said slowly. 3 days later, we met with Nancy again to begin the process of setting up the Morgan Trust. The legalities were complicated, with many meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and banks. We structured the trust so that my grandparents would retain ownership and interest during their lifetime, and I would serve as the trust administrator after their death. The house, investment portfolio, and other assets would all be transferred to the trust, preventing any allegations or misappropriation. The whole thing was kept strictly confidential. They told no one, not even their closest friends. I still lived with them, working a small job in a family law firm, struggling to build a career while caring for them. The outside world had not changed, but I slept better knowing their legacy and home were protected from my parents' machinations. Half a year after setting up the fund, his health deteriorated rapidly. At first, it was thought to be due to heart disease, but it turned out to be terminal pancreatic cancer. The doctor predicted that he would only live for 3 to 6 months. Our whole family was shocked and heartbroken. The sad news quickly reached my parents. Suddenly, they called every day, and visited every week, which was unprecedented. Valerie quit her job at the salon to help, mainly taking inventory when I wasn't paying attention. One time, I overheard my parents discussing in the garden late at night, "When the old man is finished, we have to act quickly before she hides anything." Mom said, "She's crazy, she'll sign anything." Dad asked, "What about Olivia?" Mom said, "She's meddling, and she's just graduated, and she has no experience." Dad sneered, "Just give her some money to keep quiet. If she causes trouble, sue her for undue influence." Who would believe her, their daughter? I stood there like a statue, a glass of warm water in my hand, clearly listening to their plot to divide the property. The next morning I met Nancy, and I confirmed that the trust papers were filed correctly and were safe. She said the trust was solid, but that we needed to be careful if my parents wanted my grandmother to sign new papers after my grandfather died. He seemed to sense someone was stalking him. One night I was with him when he was having trouble breathing, and he held my hand firmly, "Promise to protect you and this house. It's not just an asset, it's a symbol of our family's love, history, and sacrifice." Richard never understood that, he only saw the money. I cried and promised him, and he nodded in relief. 3 days later he fell into a coma and passed away peacefully the next morning with my grandmother and me by his side. The funeral was small, as he wished, with close friends, neighbors, and colleagues coming to see him off. My parents and sister arrived late, dressed ridiculously, and left in a hurry, saying they had driven far. Before leaving, my father pulled me aside to ask about the announcement of his will. I stood there, silently talking about him as a man of morality, wisdom, and unconditional love. Looking out at the small auditorium, I understood that a life worth living was not about money but about love. My grandparents were truly rich in that way. After the funeral, I took on the responsibility of caring for my grandmother. She was slowly losing her memory, and grief accelerated the process. Some days she recognized me right away, other days she kept asking where my grandfather was. I had to gently remind her that he was gone, and my heart was broken. I arranged a flexible work schedule, working remotely and taking fewer court cases. I hired Margaret, a devoted caregiver, to stay with her when I was busy. In the evenings, we developed new routines, old movies, photo albums, reading her favorite books. These activities helped her retain moments of clarity in her increasingly hazy memory. My parents called periodically, asking about her condition, but it sounded more like they were checking on her assets than genuinely concerned. Each time I kept my words short, increasingly protecting her from harm when she was fragile. 6 months later he died. She had pneumonia and could not fight it. She passed away peacefully at home, by her bedside, as she wished. I read to her Jane Austen, her favorite author, and played classical music that my grandparents loved. On her last night of lucidity, she mistook me for her mother, said she was very proud that I was so different from her, and silently told her to take care of me. Her funeral was smaller than his. My parents did not attend, sending flowers and a note signed by their secretary. I was not surprised, but more heartbroken by their nature. My grandmother was buried next to my grandfather in the small cemetery where generations of Morgans lie. I took solace in the knowledge that they were reunited. The silence at home was filled with sweet and bitter memories. For the first time I was truly alone, without my grandparents, who had guided me. But they had left me strength through their legacy of love and values. I was determined to preserve and grow in the way they would have wanted. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was getting used to the quiet of the house when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my parents and Valerie standing there, their faces fake sad. My mother rushed to hug me. It felt like a performance, not genuine affection. My father said, "Families need to stick together in times of trouble." He walked into the house to look around. Valerie commented that the house was bigger than I had imagined. I politely invited them in, poured them coffee and cake. The conversation followed the old script, from asking about Grandma's situation to dividing the property. Dad asked, "Have you looked at the papers? There must be a will that needs to be opened." "I'm taking care of everything," I said calmly. "Everything is settled. Mom advised me to sell the house and move to a modern apartment near work, suitable for young people. Dad said that the prices in this area were high, so I should sell soon before the market fluctuated." Valerie tapped her fingernails on the table, emphasizing that the inheritance should be divided equally. "Just because you live with your grandparents doesn't mean you get everything." Their fickleness made me want to laugh and feel bitter at the same time. I just said I wouldn't decide right now and changed the subject.
They stayed for 3 days, and I discovered my mother stealing my grandmother's jewelry while I was on the phone in another room. Dad measured the corners of the room, took pictures for further documentation. Valerie secretly asked Margaret about the bank accounts and the safe. The second night, I went to the backyard to breathe, and heard Dad on the phone discussing the plan to sell the house, setting a minimum price of $3.2 million. Their plot became more and more obvious. The next morning I found Valerie's search history on her phone. Estate attorney, how to prove a legal influence, sue for trusts. I gently asked them, "Is there anything wrong with the house?" Dad blushed and said, "Just helping you, don't stress about your new career." Mom nodded. "We're just worried about you." Valerie added, "To be fair." I just replied, "Thanks, I can take care of everything." They left, promising to return soon to help. As soon as their car was out of sight, I called Nancy to report the situation. She told me to be careful but was confident that the trust fund could not be shaken. A few weeks later, they unexpectedly returned, with Dad carrying a stack of documents. He said, "We would like to talk about where you are." Mom was threatening and said she had just found an old will that left her assets to Dad as his only son, with a lawyer's endorsement. Valerie was excited. The trust fund she thought of might be invalid if there was an old will. I knew right away that the document was a forgery. I took the trust documents and legal documents out to greet them. They were confident, but I kept quiet, then said softly, "Do you think I'll let this go?" Dad lost his confidence. Mom frowned. Valerie worried. Dad climbed the stairs, shouting, "This is my house. My grandparents want me to inherit it. What you did doesn't change anything." Just then, the door opened and Jake, Nancy, Sophia, the notary, and Margaret stepped out to stand beside me, their eyes stern, ready for legal action. My dad was stunned, speechless. Jake said, "You're accusing my daughter of forgery. Please continue." Dr. Sophia announced that an emergency restraining order had been approved by the court, preventing any fraudulent transfer of property. She clarified that presenting forged documents was a crime in Massachusetts, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. My dad's face turned white. My mother tried to be gentle. "We want everything to be okay in the family, no need to show off." I said firmly, "You and your husband set up a trust to protect the assets and legacy. I am the legal administrator. All other documents are fake." My father angrily said that he would appeal to the Supreme Court, accusing me of oppressing them. Jake approached and asked, "Are you threatening to sue for slander and defamation?" This could be considered harassment and extortion. The truck manager began to ask if the goods should be moved. My father shouted and cursed at me. I laughed contemptuously. "What can you do for me? You abandoned me when I was 5 years old. You and your husband are the ones who raised me, loved me, and taught me about life and family. You only appear when you need money and opportunities." My words made the atmosphere more stifling than ever. Valerie also hung up the phone. I continued, "I have another piece of evidence you should hear." I played the recording of my parents discussing in the garden late at night, the sound clearly showing their plot to take advantage of my confused grandmother. My mother gasped. My father was angry. "I have the right to not allow recording if I do not agree." Nancy interrupted. "Massachusetts law allows recording if the person recording is a party or has consent. Olivia was present and agreed to record. It is completely legal." Several police officers arrived after an explanation. They confirmed that the property was protected and the document transfer ban was enforced. My parents heard this and knew they had lost, but they were still bitter. "It's not over. The family shouldn't be treated so badly." I replied softly, "We agreed to that." Margaret put her arm around me and said, "Your grandparents would be so proud." I stood on the porch of the house my grandfather had built, surrounded by people who cared more sincerely and honestly than ever. I understood that this was not just about money, but also about keeping loyalty and promises to loved ones. A few days later, Jake completed the registration of my trust and my position as trustee. Nancy helped with legal protection against future challenges. The police increased patrols near the house. As for the prosecutors, they wanted me to file a criminal case, but I refused after much thought, not out of sentimentality, but because I knew my grandparents wanted me to remain civilized. They respected the decision and continued to monitor the case. I lived in fear, constantly checking the security cameras. My parents tried to contact me, threatened legal action, and tried to appease me, but when they saw that they couldn't, they stopped. I lived alone in a house filled with warm memories and lessons. Sometimes I talked as if my grandparents were still there, hoping for their blessings. I realized that the pain of losing a loved one is not linear, but rather unpredictable. To deal with the complexity of my grief, I went to therapy with Dr. Lillian Parker, who specializes in family grief and trauma. Through the sessions, I was able to release the complexity of my heart. Missing my grandparents, anger at my parents, feelings of betrayal, guilt for sometimes wishing for a normal family, and extreme loneliness. The doctor called it paired grief. Loss of loved ones and loss of the family I dreamed of. I learned to separate my parents' bad behavior from my own values, understanding that greed was their nature, not my fault. More importantly, family is not simply blood but love, respect and care for each other. My colleagues at the law firm became a solid support system, inviting me out for meals on holidays, visiting me regularly, creating conditions for me to learn and develop. About 6 months later, I decided to do some renovations in the house. Not to erase my grandparents' memories, but to blend their legacy with my future. My grandfather kept his library with its books and comfy leather chairs, and I turned an unused bedroom into a modern office. My grandmother kept her kitchen the same style, but added a new one she could enjoy exploring. Most notably, I established the Harold and Martha Morgan Scholarship Fund at the law school, which supports students interested in elder law. Using some of the fund's assets for this purpose made me feel better, like I was continuing my grandparents' generous spirit and turning a painful family story into something positive. My work has also changed. From my own experience, I specialize in elder law and estate planning, helping families set up trusts and prevent the risk of being taken over, like mine. Each client protected is a small victory, creating a positive impact from the wisdom of my grandparents. Gradually, I have built a new family around me. Margaret often visits as a friend. The neighbors have become closer after the days they witnessed the fight on my porch, and I joined a book club where I found more friendships through shared stories. 2 years after that traumatic event, I received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside was a small note from Valerie. "I'm sorry. They were wrong, and I was wrong. I miss you." There was no demand for money or mention of the house. Just an admission and sincere regret. After some thought, I responded just as briefly. "Thank you for saying that, it means a lot. I'm not opening up to further contact, but the door is still a little open. Whether it can be mended is unclear, but I see this as the beginning of a healing, though not a full recovery. As for my parents, I never heard from them again. I would occasionally see their names in junk mail or strange phone calls. I accepted the fact that I would never have a healthy relationship with them. This acceptance was painful but also freed me from painful bonds. My most profound lesson is that family is not a matter of blood or blood ties. Real family is built on love, respect, and honesty. My grandparents gave me that, and in their absence, I have created a new family of choice with friends and mentors. I still sit in his old rocking chair every spring evening when her beloved garden blooms. The house is no longer empty, but filled with memories and new opportunities. The trust not only protects my assets, but also provides a solid foundation for me to rebuild from my loss. If you or a loved one has ever struggled with family money issues, please share your story. Knowing that you are not alone in these difficult situations helps ease the pain. If my story resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and share so that it can inspire someone in need. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope you stay strong and protect the most important things in your life.